All right. It looks like we're live. So, welcome everybody. This is the Tech for Palestine Book Club, episode number 3, I believe. And as our guest today, we have Miko Peled, who's the author of The General's Son. This is the second edition, which was published in 2016. Not sure when the first edition was published.
And this is the third edition, actually. This is the 10th
Oh,
anniversary edition.
wow. Oh, nice. Okay.
So you have 3
Yeah.
covers, 3 editions.
Yeah, great. When was the first? Was it 2012 that the?
2012, the book came out. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I was reading an interview yesterday, or a review by Susan Albahawa, and
Oh yeah.
it was in 2012. So I thought, oh,
Yep.
that's yeah. So great. Why don't we assume that people haven't read the book, even though I find that unlikely, and you can just tell us a little bit about who you are and about what the book is, and just whatever depth you want to go into.
So first, thanks for having me. This is a real privilege. I appreciate it. And the book, like we said, the book came out in 2012, and then 2016 second edition. 2022 we did a kind of celebratory 10th anniversary edition, and it was a result of many years of people telling me that there's a story that should be written. And when it's your story, you don't really think there's anything unique about it. But I gave it a shot, and I had a great publisher and some good editors and everything. And the book came out, and the story is, well, there's 2 parts to it. The first part is the General's Son. And I'm glad you brought up Susan Abulhawa's review, because it was really, really fantastic. I really think it was a good review. Not good in that it was complimentary so much, but good in that it demonstrated what goes on when you read the book as a Palestinian. And so the first part, the General's Son, it's growing up in a very, very patriotic Zionist family where everybody around you was held some significant role within the Zionist mythology. So there were my maternal grandparents, who were kind of Jewish aristocracy. My maternal grandfather was a doctor and a Zionist leader. Before in the early 20s and 30s, he was traveling around. He was in the UN. He was speaking about Zionism. He later, once the state was established, he was one of the signers on the Declaration of Independence, and so on. And he was an ambassador. So there's all this kind of, I don't even know what to call it, but just the fanfare of creation of the state, and then being an official within the state, and so on. And then on my father's side, it was the working class, working class labor Zionists who came and toiled and worked and built roads, and that part of the mythology. And my father grew out of that, joined the Haganah, which today I would refer to as a terrorist group, when he was 16. And then later on, 1948, he was an officer. He remained in the military. And then after 1967, at which point he was already a general and a member of the Israeli High Command, and a year after that, he resigned. And what he did that was unique was that as soon as that 1967 war was over, he stood up and he said, well, now we can make peace with the Palestinians based on this idea that we know today is the 2-state solution, which is the West Bank will go and the Gaza Strip will go to the Palestinians. East Jerusalem will be their capital. Israel should give back the lands that they took from Syria and Egypt, and we all live in peace. Of course, the problem was that nobody was interested in that. And as he was saying this, still in uniform, by the way, everybody, the establishment went on to destroy Palestinian towns and villages and expel hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and build for Jews only in the West Bank, like they did everywhere else in Palestine. And so the rest of his life was his commitment to the 2-state solution and to peace with the Palestinians and so forth. So the first part of the book is all about that. And one of the things that Susan points out, and I've heard this from many Palestinians, is that part is very difficult for Palestinians to read because there's a sense that it glorifies Zionism and it glorifies, and it did, to me, it seemed, to me, it seemed incredible. I mean, I was really proud to be a kid with all these people, in my immediate and extended family. Then the second part of the book is the journey of an Israeli in Palestine. That's the journey that I took around 2001 that I embarked on. And I began with the intention of meeting Palestinians and getting in touch with Palestinians and getting in touch with Palestine, because I always felt that there was something artificial about the life we as Israelis lived. I couldn't quite frame it as apartheid at that point, but there's a sense that there's something isolated about it and insulated, because there's these other people all around that we never engage and we never meet and we have nothing to do with. And they're Palestinians, it turns out. And then it turns out they were here even before us and they have some rights, So gradually that was the journey from this very insulated space of the occupier, of the colonizer, to where Palestinians live and where Palestine was still Palestine. So those are the two parts. Those are the two parts of the story of the book. And it was interesting because my publisher, when the book came out, asked Susan to come and moderate a conversation like this with me. And it was in New York immediately after the book came out. And she started reading it. And she said, "No way, why would I want to sit with this guy?" And Helena, my publisher, said, "Well, read to the end and then decide." And she read to the end. And then, of course, she came and we had the event. And since then, we've done things together and so on. So that's how the book is made out.
Yeah, she mentions in that review that the line that won her over was when you said, when you recognized that Israelis were settlers in historic Palestine, in all of historic Palestine, I thought that was interesting. But it was after you had left Israel, right? You had moved out of Israel to the States, if I remember correctly, to San Diego, and then there was the bombing where you lost your niece, and that was kind of the turning point, was it not, for you to start really questioning the origin story of Israel?
Yes. So after that horrible tragedy, a 13-year-old little girl was killed. I was already living in the U.S., but there was a sense that, okay, I got to do something. I have to engage with someone who has strong feelings about this as I do. And living in San Diego, it's not an easy task because it's too beautiful and warm and lovely for people to care about something like that. But eventually, and thankfully, I did engage. I did meet the Palestinian community in San Diego. And that was the time when living room dialogue groups were a thing. And so I joined one of these groups. And thankfully, even though dialogue is all about, listening and that sort of thing and not engaging in politics, this was a group of activists. And so it was really cutting edge stuff. And I knew nothing about these things. They were telling me things about 1948 that I thought were completely absurd, and ethnic cleansing and massacres and all kinds of things. And basically we were the bad guys and they were the good guys, to put it, really, really in simple terms. And I just couldn't fathom that could be true. But I also couldn't fathom that they all just got around to lie to me. In other words, it couldn't be that all these Palestinians conspired to make up a story. So I looked into it. Ilan Pape just come out with a bunch of books, and several other historians, Avi Schleim and so on. So I educated myself, and I found that what they were saying was true, and what I thought was true was not true. And really, thanks to their being so gracious, I was able to navigate this difficult place where you suddenly realize that everything you believe, everything you know to be true is not. And somebody else is what somebody else is telling you is the truth, and that this heroic and wonderful story, excuse me, that my family was a part of is all a lie. It was not heroism. It was a war crime. It was terrible. It was crimes against humanity. But again, thanks to their generosity of spirit and so on, nobody was ever pointing fingers. Nobody was ever making any accusations. It was all, they let me take the time that I needed to walk through this very strange limbo until I reached the place where I was comfortable in saying what I say now, and understanding what I understand now. And so, yes, that was my first engagement really with Palestinians, and my first engagement with the fact that there's a whole other story, which is diametrically opposed to the story that I thought was true.
Yeah, that's interesting. Can you talk more about how that transformation came about? Because one thing that, and maybe you covered it in the book and I just missed it, but I was curious about, like, so your father in 1967 sort of has a change of heart and starts becoming, less of an overt Zionist. I mean, I think you said he was a Zionist until he passed, but he was more of a peace, a two-state solution kind of person after 67. But then somehow that didn't apparently rub off on you while you were like growing up until like 2001, like you said.
Well, it's not that it didn't rub off on me. I wasn't involved in activism or this. I heard what he had to say. It made sense to me, so I agreed with it, and that was, I adopted that stance. But it wasn't. I wasn't active in any way on this issue.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wonder about that. So just for context, like I myself, I'm not Jewish or Palestinian or in any way, directly impacted, other than being, here in the United States and complicit in that way. But until October 7th, 2023, I knew nothing about Israel. I knew nothing about Palestine. I knew nothing about the history. I knew, as much as an average American might know, that there was a eternal religious war going on over there. Like that's the story I understood. So for me, it was once I made the decision in October 2023 to educate myself, and I started reading all these books. And of course, I have the benefit of there having been a tremendous amount of scholarship in the last 30 years that I could learn from. But I just find it interesting to hear how other people go through this transformation. And I wonder, did you go right from like hardcore Zionist into like anti-Zionist, or was it like a path? I mean, I guess, of course it was a path, but I mean, like, what was that? How did you?
So it was gradual. Throughout my adult life, there were points where I realized, or I saw, maybe I didn't realize because I didn't have the context, but there were cracks being built in that secure sense of my Zionism, and the justice of Zionism, and the righteousness of Zionism, and the morality and the justice of the army and the military and so on. The first one I mentioned in the book, and whenever I speak, there's always an older Palestinian who has something to say about the story, which is that in 1948, when the west side of Jerusalem was going through a complete ethnic cleansing process, not a single Palestinian remained in West Jerusalem. So there were beautiful homes. These were, well-to-do Palestinians. Their homes were being given to Israeli families. My mother was 22 at the time. She was already a mother. My father was, in the front, at the front, fighting for the cause. And she was offered a home like that, one of these homes. And anybody who's been to Jerusalem, they're very distinct. It's a very distinct Palestinian architecture. And these are beautiful homes with arches and made of local stone and so on. And at 22, she said, "How can I take the home of another family?" how can I move to the home of another mother that now has to raise her family in, as a refugee? And she refused. And then she would also talk about the looting, the trucks full of loot. And she talked about it with a lot of pain. And she told me this story, I don't know, thousands of times as I was growing up throughout my life. So when this started, when my journey, so to speak, started, when that process began, I started talking to her again. And then when I was working on the book, I spoke to her again and again and again about these experiences. And so I didn't get it was a problematic story because the national narrative is that we're the good guys, we're the heroes. We don't loot, we don't take people's homes and that sort of thing. Then later on and then there were other steps along the way with my father's activism and so forth. Now, by the way, he did what he did because he believed that that was the most important thing to do for the Jewish state. And then making peace with the Palestinians, making peace with the neighbors was the most important thing. So he did it out of a sense of duty and responsibility for Zionism and the Zionist project. So anyway, I would go with him sometimes to events and to protests and so forth. And he was very supportive of the Palestinian citizens of Israel when there were land confiscations and so on. There were protests. He would always go and support them. He used whatever leverage he still had, which wasn't much by that point, to try to help people. Somebody's being deported, somebody's son is arrested, somebody's land is taken. So he would try to help these people. That community as much as he could. And so I'd go with him. And then, of course, I served in the military. And I went in all gung-ho and thinking I was going to be a fighter and so forth. But that kind of, I was weaned from that eventually. And then there was the last year of my service was the invasion of Lebanon, 1982. And if anybody, and that's something that affected, I think, my entire generation of people that were leaning, more left and more progressive. It was obvious that the army was lying, the government was lying. This was a total disaster. And then there was Sabra and Shatila, which was obvious that Israel had its hand in it. So, little by little, more and more cracks were being, I could feel the cracks in this belief, in this ideology and in the state and so forth. And then there was the Second Intifada, which was, from my perspective, it was a real breaking point. The killing and the abuse of Palestinians and so forth. And then meeting the Palestinians in San Diego in these groups, in these dialogue groups, was an eye opener. But I was still holding on to this, two-state solution-ism. And it wasn't really until 2005, and I remember the day, it was December 2005, and someone told me that there's this new initiative by Palestinian activists in the West Bank to begin, and this is like in the aftermath of the Second Intifada, to start these nonviolent protests, unarmed protests, popular resistance. And I was in Palestine, and I drove to this little village that I hadn't heard of before called Bil'in, which later on became the Mecca for activism. I mean, any activist had to show that they were there and they participated in these marches. And I was there just on a regular day to meet the activists that were there. And I've never driven to the West Bank. I've never been in the West Bank without a gun, certainly. So as I was driving, I could feel these fear viruses just kind of taking over, all the demons taking over. And I met these guys and walked through the city that was being built. And I use the term city, not settlement, because I want to make it clear that we're talking about a city, with condos and streets and highways leading to it and shopping malls and schools. I think the word settlement sometimes is misleading. And I was looking at the city that was built on their land and in which they are not permitted, not even to walk in, not let alone, have an apartment live in, because they're Palestinians. And then it dawned on me, the whole two-state solution is a lie. It was a lie from the beginning. It was nonsense. It's never going to happen. Somebody's investing billions of dollars in building cities They're not going away anywhere. So then why not just, what are the virtues of having two states anyway? Why not just live in one democratic state with equal rights, and that's it? Why do we need this division? Why do we need a Jewish state? And so that's when the wall came tumbling down completely for me. And the apartheid wall hadn't been built yet, but it was just starting. They were starting to the digging and the building, and that's when I crossed over back and forth with these activists. And they could have been arrested. I mean, they hosted me, and they took me to see it. They could have been arrested just for being there. And then I realized just the courage of these young activists who are still friends of mine, 25 years later. In fact, one of them, Iyad Burnat, was just here in the U.S. speaking, and he came to visit. So that was the moment that it really dawned on me. I really got back, and I came back to the U.S. and I wrote an article about it that Ali Abu Naima published in the Electronic Intifada, and that was it.
Yeah, I thought of a couple of things when you were talking about the looting in West Jerusalem. One was the documentary film, The Great Book Robbery.
Exactly. Yep. That's right.
Yeah, really available on YouTube. Yeah, really, really good. And then I thought of a reel, I think it was, I saw yesterday of IDF soldiers taking over some large houses in Palestine, in West Bank, and going in, like throwing the families out and just hanging out. And then you can see on the cameras, they're just like hanging out in their living room and everything. And I just thought, like, I don't know how anybody cannot see what's happening there. Like, I mean, the obvious, like, parallels to like what we were taught about colonialism growing up. I mean, we know academically that this is a settler colonial project, but also, like, it's just like really obvious, it seems to me. And yet, I don't know about the world. I think the world actually is coming around. From what I've heard, like, there's been a real shift in narrative over the last 2.5 years that hasn't really happened in the last few decades. And yet in Israel specifically, they seem to be sort of immune to reality. And that really confuses me. Like, what are your thoughts about what is, Israeli society like? What is the, when I see these stats, like 80% of them, wanting to see all the Palestinians, ejected from the land, et cetera, et cetera. I don't understand how, because Haaretz exists, right? I mean, I read Haaretz periodically. I read at least Gideon Levy's columns and Amira Haas, but and I think, like, so it's not like
you're one of a very few people that reads Haaretz. Nobody reads Haaretz over there.
Oh, really? Is that?
Yeah. Only kind of liberals and progressives in this, outside of read Haaretz. Nobody reads Haaretz. My mother used to read Haaretz. I think she was one of the last remaining, loyal subscribers.
Yeah, I saw. Did you see that movie, Coexistence, My Ass?
No.
It's an Israeli comedian who grew up in, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a village in Israel that's like half Palestinians and half Israelis.
Oasis of Peace, yes.
Yeah. And so she's a comedian, and so she did this movie about how, like, after October 7th, it became clear to her that this whole idea of coexistence was a lark, because, immediately after October 7th, the divide, like, happened even in that little coexistence community.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, so I guess, what are your thoughts generally about Israeli society? Can it be reformed? Does it have to be, like,
So several things. Like I said, first of all, nobody reads Haaretz, so Haaretz is not an indicator. I read the Hebrew news, and I watch the Hebrew news on the various channels and platforms. And when people say that there seems to be and this is a very common thing that people say, that there seems to be a shift to the right in Israeli society, that they're far more extreme. And then I remind people that that society was formed, and that regime, this regime called Israel, was formed in 1948, when there was this massive campaign of ethnic cleansing, this brutal campaign that included countless massacres and just the cruel, unimaginable cruelty. And everybody agreed to it. Everybody thought it was fine. Nobody stood up and said, let's stop. And then that society and in fact, the government that was in place, it was a provisional government first, but then they became the government. They were voted for. And these people stayed in power for a very long time, and they were considered very good people. You know, they were Zionist socialists, which is more like National Socialists than socialists. But these were the people. This was the society. That was a society that was okay with that. And when anybody dared to challenge that, even my father didn't challenge that, but when anybody dared to challenge the legitimacy of what happened in 1948, they're called a traitor. In fact, Israeli identity is tied to that horror more than anything else. And that was one of the problems that I was having when I realized that there was no heroism there, that it was really a brutality of unimaginable proportions. And so that's Israeli society. And if we remember that, then what we saw in Gaza since October 7th makes perfect sense. It's a completely natural continuation of what happened in 1948 and what happened in between 1948 and 2023 and today. There hasn't been any shift at all. It has been very consistent. Dispossessing Palestinians, massacres, Palestinians living under a reign of terror, whether they're in 1948, in the Naqab, in Jerusalem, in the Galilee, in Jaffa, Lid, Ramle, on the coast. I mean, everywhere Palestinians live, they've always lived under a Zionist reign of terror. So to me, there's nothing surprising about the fact that there's such broad support for this genocidal assault on Gaza. There's no surprise there. In fact, if we look at it again, kind of with a broad lens, there's nothing surprising. There's nothing, in fact, you'd expect it. How is it that people didn't expect this to happen? You know, it makes perfect sense if we look at the entire last 8 or 9 decades in Palestine. There's been a real consistency in terms of what the Zionists doing in order to implement their plan and implement their ideology. So this is Israeli society. And the thing is, too, there's no real, and as when we say Israeli society, it's really misleading, because there is no Israeli society. Israeli society is a bunch of different groups that were tied with Scotch tape and barely holding together, because there's so many rifts and so much tension between the different groups. What October 7th did was rip off that Scotch tape, and now all these different groups are at each other's throats. The vitriol, the hatred, the way people talk to each other, the racism internally and towards the Palestinians is being expressed in ways that it hasn't been before, because people try to pretend that there is some kind of a cohesive, that Israelis are some kind of a cohesive group, which they never were. So now we not only see the racism and the violence towards the Palestinians, but internally, even in conversations not conversations, but in committees and in the Knesset and so on. It's beyond belief, the violence and the hatred internally. I'm talking about verbal violence mostly, and that is one thing that I think one of the many things that October 7th brought about in shattering the apartheid state is that it completely ripped off that Scotch tape, and now all these different groups are just at each other's throats. So they're destroying each other. They're destroying this whole thing internally. And I'll say one more thing about that, which is that there's a community of about 2 million ultra-Orthodox Jews that have never accepted the state, that remain anti-Zionist. And today you've got that community has about 80,000 young men who are eligible for draft. In the past, historically, the army didn't want them. They didn't want the army, so they got along fine. But now the army wants them, and they say they need them, and they're saying, we're not going to serve in your army. We will die before we serve in your army. And that is huge. That is another massive tear within that the different groups that call themselves, or refer to themselves as Israeli society.
Is that 2 million in Israel, or including the diaspora? Oh wow, okay, I didn't know.
No, that's just in Israel. If you drive up, I'm writing a book about this community now, the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community, which is the anti-Zionist ultra-Orthodox community. And I spent a lot of time up in New York. They can't build fast enough homes and schools. And I mean, they grow in huge numbers. They're here, they're in Europe, they're in Palestine, in Jerusalem. They protest, they get beat up, they get thrown in jail, they get tortured because they won't serve. And so, yeah, and then they stand. They're not afraid. I think their stance is heroic, but they and so that's another thing, that to see the hatred between the kind of secular Israelis against them, which always existed, but it was under the surface, and also between the different factions of within Israeli politics, some of whom are happy to give them a pass because they support Netanyahu's coalition. Others call them deserters and parasites and all kinds of things. So it's really crumbling from inside both the state itself and the society.
It almost sounds like numerically, if you add the Orthodox Jews with the Palestinian citizens of Israel, there's like a majority of anti-Zionists in Israel. Like, is that?
You could say that, and between the river and the sea, there's a majority for sure, and there's a majority of Arabs for sure, a majority of Palestinians and people of Arab descent, which are the Israelis who came from, or Jews who came from Arab countries.
So this is what they're so afraid of, right? Is losing that demographic superiority in Israel.
The demographic superiority, also the superiority of people who look like me, as opposed to people who look, have darker skin.
Yeah. Do you think that nation state law that was passed, when was that, 2018? Was that like a significant sort of shift for like an admission of, yeah, we're a Jewish supremacist state? Or I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
So the laws that existed before they passed this one already made it clear that it is a racist apartheid regime, because the laws were already in place. And it's not just laws. There's several layers to this. There are the laws, which existed, dozens and dozens of laws that discriminated specifically against the Palestinian citizens. Then there are policies that are enacted locally, and then there's culture. So there's no law that says that the Palestinian Bedouin, there's 300,000 Palestinian Bedouin in the Nakab. There's no law that says that they, should live in poverty and should not receive jobs and are prevented from cultivating the land, which historically was theirs. And that that's the policy. There's no law that says that their homes have to be demolished at an unspeakable, horrific rate of thousands per year. But that's the reality. That's the policy. There's no law that says that Palestinians shouldn't be given building permits, right? There's no law that says that an Israeli can't sell or lease a home to a Palestinian in a Jewish community. But no one's going to do it. And so you've got these three layers. And so what the national nation state law did, they just took all of these things and said, well, it's not enough just to have the laws. We're going to make it a basic law, which is kind of like the Israeli constitution, a basic law, which kind of, puts a more official rubber stamp to it. This is who we are. And one of the criticisms internally was that this is bad PR because it's taking the racist reality and making it, putting it up on the, highlighting it. And so that was a criticism against it. But it didn't really present anything new, just that it was formalized in a way that it cannot be challenged. And it's kind of ridiculous because it's almost like the more they add legality to their crimes internally, the more their lack of confidence in themselves is apparent. It's like you're jumping up and down. You're saying, "This is mine. This is mine. This is mine." It's you're only going to speak Hebrew, and only we are allowed self-determination, and only da 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 da. And it's okay to have these racist committees that make sure the Palestinians don't live in our communities, and it's okay to do this, that, and the other. That was a reality before they passed it, but it's like they have to show that this is even, to me, it shows how weak and insecure they are.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you want to talk about Palestine House?
Sure, of course.
Is there a relationship between Palestine House? Like, I've been to a Palestine House in London, and there's a Palestine House, I understand, in San Diego, and then you have one in DC. But are these all like separate things, or is there some?
So in San Diego, it was it took them. When I used to live in San Diego for a long time, and so they have it in Balboa Park, which is the main park in San Diego. They have an international houses area where they have all these tiny little cottages that represent countries. And most of them are kind of boring. There's dust everywhere. People come, take a look. I don't know, maybe they have a Danish cookie or something. I don't know. It's pretty. And there's an Israel house, of course. And so, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago or so, the community in San Diego created an organization, and they were part of it, but they didn't have an actual house. So they would hold events and that sort of thing, and celebrations, and they have like a grass lawn in the middle between all the houses. And of course, the Israel house, they would go nuts every time they saw the Palestinians. And then a few years ago, they decided they were going to allow to build houses for some of the countries that didn't have one. It cost a fortune, and the community raised the money and built a beautiful, beautiful house of Palestine. It's larger and more beautiful than any of the houses there. It's really, really magnificent. And the Israelis are like on there, breathing down their neck, trying to sue them every 5 minutes and cause trouble and what have you. So that's that. The one in London, from what I understand, is more of kind of a cultural hub, but I don't really know much about it. It's also rather new.
Yeah.
The purpose of Palestine House of Freedom, or Dar Hurriya in Arabic, the purpose for building that is that in the capital here in Washington, there was no place. There was no formal place for Palestine. That didn't exist. You see all the embassies, the flags, cultural building, and so on. No Palestine. So I, along with some Palestinian comrades, thought about, well, what do we do about that? And we had all sorts of ideas. And then we decided we want to create an organization, which we did, a nonprofit, 501c3. And we want to do, we want to act contrary to what most Palestine NGOs do here, which is, they use an acronym. They don't necessarily use the name Palestine. They're kind of hidden. They don't want to, stand out for valid reasons. We want to do the opposite. We wanted a most high-profile place in a high-profile area in town, put the flag up, be right there, like to show Palestine is here. And of course, rent for a place like that here in DC is, the cost is enormous. So eventually, we created the organization, and about 2.5 years ago, or 3 years, 2023, in January, we created the organization. About a year and a half later, so 2 summers ago, we were given a space on Capitol Hill, a magnificent space, large, with offices and an event space and a courtyard, and just a magnificent space on Pennsylvania Avenue, just a couple of blocks from the Capitol, from Congress. And so we put up the flag, we put up the name. We're right there on Pennsylvania Avenue. We're very proud, and we have events there and so forth. And the things that we do as a nonprofit, our designation is education. And the purpose of the education that we are providing is for people to understand that a liberated Palestine from the river to the sea, with the right of return and equal rights, is the path that will in the end benefit everyone who lives in historic Palestine. It's not a two-state solution. It's not about dialogue. It's not about any of these things. We are 100% Palestine space, demanding all of Palestine and teaching people about this. And so the way we do this, we have three basic pillars. We have an outreach pillar, outreach to Congress, and we spend a lot of time there, and we have events with staffers, and we meet with members and so on. And basically, we provide them with the information that we know, first of all, that Israel is not a democracy. It's never been a democracy within 1948 borders. And so we focus on that. Then we have events in the space, and we have a social media presence, and we put out videos with interviews and commentary. Again, everything focused on that. And we just completed a curriculum, a really, really comprehensive curriculum that includes the history of Palestine going back 1,500 years, Palestinian culture, and Palestinian politics. And we just finished it. It's very comprehensive. We use only Palestinian sources, and we are, 95% Palestinian sources. And that will be made available for people. We're just finalizing it, and it'll be made available. It's a 15-hour course. And we have 5 modules, and it's all really professionally done. Again, we hired a curriculum developer to do that. So we have the events, the curriculum, the outreach, and of course, social media and videos that we put out. And we allow anybody, all of our allies, all the other Palestine groups or other, justice groups, to use the space for events for free. So we either do our events, we collaborate with other groups, or other groups come and do their thing. And it's a big space. I mean, when we open the outdoors, the courtyard, we can easily have 200 people, 250 people there. And we have vendors and all kinds of events, cultural events, music, commemorating events like the Nakba, or we have a Naji al-Ali event coming up in August to commemorate the killing of Naji al-Ali, the cartoonist. So that's what we do, and all of our funding is donation based. We're not sponsored by any one organization or any one state or anything like that. And we're there for people to come and visit and participate or donate if they like. We have a website, PalestineHouseOfFreedom.org.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I'm gonna come to DC just to see that.
Oh, please do. Yeah, please do. Yeah. Where are you? Where are you?
I'm in Michigan, in the Detroit area. So.
Oh, you've got an important election coming up.
Yes. Yeah. I'm rooting for Abdul personally, but he came and spoke at an event that we had in California a few months ago, and I got to talk to him there. I'm a little disappointed that he's not a socialist, but I'll let it slide.
Let that slide, yeah.
So I got a few questions here from the audience. So if you don't mind, I'll just share them. First one is, it's been a while since you wrote the book. Are you more or less hopeful about the situation since then?
That's a great question. The way I view hope is something that we create ourselves. It's not like something that's out there. It's something that we create. And I think we're obliged to create the hope that we believe is hopeful, that we want to see, and then fight for it. So I have to be hopeful, because otherwise, what would I be doing? I'll be, no reason to get out of bed in the morning. And the hope that I look for, that motivates me, is the fact that I believe in what I do, in liberating Palestine, in dismantling the apartheid regime, in the right of return, and so on, and the future of a future for Palestine. And I view it as this particular 100 years as a dark chapter in a very long and very I would say even glorious history of Palestine. And so I have to have hope, because otherwise I couldn't do it. So again, it's something that you create and then you fight for.
Yeah, I can't remember where I heard it, but somebody said hope is an action, and I think about that all the time. Like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, another question is, what do you think about Zoran Mamdani?
What do I think about him?
Yeah.
I appreciate what he does. I think he's fantastic. I think he's created a shift in American politics that is irreversible. And this is going to be, and I think that his influence on American politics is, I think we're going to see it in a big way in the upcoming elections and the midterms, and then even a bigger way in the elections, the presidential elections.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, somebody wants to know what you think. I don't know if this was a news story from today, something about Israeli soldiers deserting a base and going AWOL.
Yeah.
I didn't hear about
It's
that.
interesting that it's gotten so much news. I mean, it has to do with what's the word? Hazing. So there's in a lot of the in these units, the combat units, there's a lot of hazing going on, and there was a commander that just forbid it, and all the paraphernalia that goes with the hazing he got rid of, and so this entire platoon just got up and left and said, you know what, this is part of who we are, part of our culture, and we have a right to do this, and blah blah blah. I don't think it's significant in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I think it's interesting to see, but it has to do with whether or not hazing is a legitimate part of the unit, of the cohesion of the unit.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. All right, this one might be a little harder for you to answer. Do you still have disagreement with your brother-in-law about the one-state versus two-state solution?
I don't know. After October 7th, he doesn't speak to me, so I don't know. My commentary immediately after October 7 and all the way till today, certain people in my family feel it was that I crossed the line, that I am, I'm supporting terrorism, I'm supporting the murder of innocent civilians because of my stance. And so I don't know what he thinks anymore, because we haven't been in touch in a long time.
Yeah, that's I hear that a lot too. Of course, that any sort of supporting of Palestine is supporting of terrorism. It's weird too, because I would have thought that some people might have reacted that way immediately after October 7th, but then after watching genocide for 2.5 years, maybe would come around. But I haven't seen much of that. Like, of the people who I know who were hardcore, like, pro-Israel people on October 7th, they still are. Like, nothing, they still, like, if I mention anything that happens today, they bring up October 7th, 2023. And I'm just like, how is that the only significant event in this whole story? I just don't get it. But.
Well, as a matter of fact, what has happened is that people who are sort of peace leaning, or left leaning, as they call it in Israeli politics, have come out and said, we were wrong. Palestinians are killers. We cannot make peace with them. We have to kill them. I don't think that was the stance of my family or my brother-in-law. I don't think he was that extreme. But if I was to guess, I would say that the main disagreement is that I refuse to condemn the Palestinians for their resistance. And I didn't believe, and I didn't accept all the lies that were told by the Hasbara, by the Israeli government, about what happened on October 7th. From the very beginning, I said, I don't believe any of it. These are rumors, these are lies, and I don't believe it. And they were offended by that.
Yeah.
So I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Okay. Why do you think that the EU states and countries are still silent on these atrocities? Is the Zionist lobby just as strong as it is in the US? And I guess you can reference Ilan Pape's magisterial work, like lobbying for Zionism on both sides of the Atlantic. But I have it, but I haven't read that. It's a very big book.
Well, there's two reasons. One is, yes, the lobby is very strong. The other reason is that it's white supremacy, and nobody cares when people of dark skin are being killed. And Israel is viewed as a European settlement, as people who are white skinned and good people in that regard. It all goes down to white supremacy. Who cares what happens to dark people? It's not really our issue. So that's why the EU is silent. There's no other explanation. That's why here in America, nobody cares too. It's all about white supremacy.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm reading a book right now called Selective Empathy by Robert de Vogely. That's kind of on that topic. It's really interesting. Okay, last question I have here is, thank you for speaking out against Zionism and being unequivocal in your advocacy for Palestine. Is there anything that is not currently being done that you think can help break through the Israeli propaganda?
Yeah, a lot. There's a lot that's not being done. I think, and one of the purposes of and one of the objectives of Palestine House of Freedom, what we did was to think strategically. What's missing? What's happening here? Why are we not? We're seeing millions of people in the streets. We're seeing public opinion shifting, but it doesn't even make a dent. The genocide is going on, and and rarely do people talk about it outside the circles of the Palestine solidarity. So I think we need to do a lot more. I think we need to work better together as a move, and we're not really a movement. So people say there's a movement, and we're not really a movement because everybody does something different, which is fine. Every organization does important things. We're just not working together. So somebody does a protest, somebody else doesn't know. Somebody has an initiative, somebody else doesn't know. Somebody works together, but these guys don't like each other, so they don't show up. So we have all this. We have more fractures than we do unity, even though we agree, I think. And also, I think there's people they have reservations about being outspoken. And in some cases, that's justifiable, of course, especially Palestinians, people with immigration issues. But those of us that don't have those concerns, there's reservations about coming out and saying, yes, Zionism is the problem. In fact, I just got an email from a friend asking me about progressive Jews that won't say they reject Zionism. That's a serious problem. Not rejecting Zionism is accepting white supremacy, because that's what Zionism is. It's accepting racism. It's accepting violence as a means to colonize other people. So that's a big problem, and I think that's again part of what we're trying to do, is to say, yes, this is the problem, and we should be talking about it, and it's legitimate to talk about it because we're not saying anything that's not true. I mean, there's a 100-year history of Zionism in Palestine. We don't have to be a genius to figure out what their purpose is and what their methods are to achieve their purposes. We've seen it 100 years. How much longer do we need to wait to understand that Zionism is a violent, racist, white supremacist ideology that produced this apartheid, violence regime? And so I think that's really important to do, to be really straightforward about this. I personally believe that condemning Palestinians is wrong. I don't believe there's such a thing as Palestinian terrorism. Palestinian resistance is legitimate. They have been living under a reign of terrorism for almost 100 years throughout all of Palestine. The instability of Western Asia and North Africa as a result of the apartheid state has been, a cause for suffering for everybody in the region. I mean, Lebanon, how many times have they invaded and massacred people in Lebanon? Now Syria, they've got parts of Syria. Now they're attacking Iran. If we look at the source of instability over the last 100 years in Western Asia, it's the Zionist regime, and in North Africa too. And so I think it's really, really important that we are very clear about that. And people often say, kind of like what you said in the beginning, I'm not Jewish, I'm not a Palestinian. So sometimes people don't feel comfortable in expressing that because they think maybe they might offend someone. Well, if somebody supports white supremacy and racism, they should be offended. They're the ones who are creating who are polarizing. It's not people who believe in justice and peace and humanity that are the problem. So I think we need to. These are things that I think we can do as solidarity. It's not just solidarity. I believe we're part of the resistance. Roger Waters referred to Palestine House as a resistance cell above ground. Basically. And so I believe I think what we do, I think, we're all fighting for the same cause. I think we should do it better, work together better.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wonder, what do you think about that? How do you think, so you've been in the movement for so long, you've must have seen many organizations come and go and grow and shrink, and what do you think is the biggest obstacle to more collaboration in the movement, or the actual forming of a movement? Like you said, it doesn't really seem as much like a movement as it does like a aggregation of movements.
I think there are two things. Early on, when this idea, the Palestine House of Freedom, was just an idea, I spoke to a lot of Palestinians that I respect, and one of them was Ali Abu Nema. And his question was, how are you going to be different than all these other NGOs who, at the end of the day, are beholden to the donors? And I thought that was a really, really powerful question, and something that we had to deal with, and internally, and say, well, we need to maintain, because the pressure, things like, don't say the word Palestine. Don't put the sign Palestine. Don't use the Arabic. Part of our logo is Arabic Dar al-Hurriya. Don't use that. It's going to turn people away. Don't talk about one state. It's offensive. Don't say river to the sea, because it's, somebody might, not want to give you money or whatever. And so I think part of the problem is that as organizations, some organizations perhaps feel that they have to be beholden to their donors. And so they gag themselves to a point. I think also that there's always personal issues. I don't like this person. I don't trust that person. Trust is a big deal, and it takes a long time for us to trust one another, for good reason. I mean, there are a lot of groups out there that are trying to we're in a foxhole trying to fight, and suddenly all these people come, and you don't know who to trust. So that's another issue, and then I think that a lot of people feel that being like outright and clear in your position on this is just pushing the envelope too far. So I think these are all things that we can all work on, and eventually, because all the organizations that are out there do fantastic work. I mean, there's great stuff, and I have seen groups come and go and organizations come and go. But everybody has a role, and it's like different paths to the same goal. We just need to make sure that we're on the path to the goal through all these different missions, through all these different means.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that's amazing. We're at the hour, so thank you so much, Miko. I hope you don't mind that we kind of veered off from your book into other topics.
Oh, no, that's fine. Of course. No, this is great. It's a good conversation. I enjoyed it.
Right, great. And lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't say Abigail Abarbanel says hello. She told me say hi to Miko.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
So
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And the book, everybody, is The General's Son, of course. The third edition is now available, And
Yeah.
yeah, I look
And
forward
we
to
actually give it out for donation. So if people go on our website and make a donation, but this is only within the US, we have like books and all kinds of gifts, but this book is available for a donation as well. So it's tax deductible if anybody cares to do
And
that.
you said you're working on a new book now? Is that
I'm working
right?
on a book about the ultra-Orthodox community. I've been working on it for a while, and now it's coming together very well. So
It sounds like it'll pair well with Molly Crabapple's book on the
exactly, that's exactly what I was thinking. I know that's my thought exactly. Yes, and I told her that as well. I think it'll be because these are the two main Jewish groups that existed before World War II, and they were totally anti-Zionist. So
yeah, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Miko. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.